Oversea Under Stone by Susan Cooper, Chapter 8. "But how did you know where to come?" Simon said as Great-Uncle Mary changed gear noisily at the foot of the hill up to the grey house.
"I didn't really. I was just driving round the village, hoping I should find you. I left as soon as Jane and Barney came tumbling back into the house. Poor mites, they were in a dreadful state. They rushed into the drawing-room and grabbed me bodily. Your parents were rather amused. They seemed to think we're playing some great private game."
Great-Uncle Mary smiled grimly. "Gosh, it was lucky you chose that road to drive along," Simon said. "I've never been so glad to see anybody in my life."
"Well, you must remember, I know Trewisic. When the children said they hadn't been able to find you on the path back to the house, I knew there was only one way you could have gone. You came out into the Pentreath Lane, didn't you?"
"There was a lane," Simon said, "all shut in by trees. I didn't really have time to see what it was called." Great-Uncle Mary chuckled.
"No, I dare say not, although I gambled on you turning out of that lane onto the main Tregony Road, which in fact you did. Good job you didn't go the other way."
"Why?" Simon said, remembering the blind choice he had made in the lane, with the boy scrambling over the stile behind him.
"In the other direction. That lane is a dead end. It leads to the Pentreath farm. If you can call it a farm, it's been hopelessly neglected for years. Mrs. Polk's no-good brother lives there, young Bill Hoover's father. So does the boy himself when he bothers to go home, which I gather isn't very often. But on the whole, it wouldn't have been a very healthy place for you to run to."
"Golly," said Simon. He felt cold all through.
"Well, never mind. You didn't anyway."
Great-Uncle Mary stopped the car with a final rattle and roar, and heaved at the handbrake.
"Here we are, safe home. Now you run along and clean yourself up before your mother sees you. There's some friend of hers come to supper, so she'll be shut up in the drawing-room. Out you get. I'll put the car away, and Simon—"
Simon, halfway out the door, with the manuscript clutched to his breast, paused and looked back. He could only just see Great-Uncle Mary, his ruffled white hair turned to a dark tangle in the shadow, and light from a street lamp in the hill reflecting eerily back to make his eyes two glinting points in the dark.
"It was very well done,"
Great-Uncle Mary said quietly. Simon said nothing, but slammed the door, feeling suddenly more grown up than he had ever been before. And when the car turned, coughing up the hill, he forgot all his weariness and crossed the road, holding his back very straight. Jane and Barney were at the door before he had one foot on the step. They hustled him inside and toward the stairs. "Did he catch you? We've still got it. It's well done." "You've still got it. Oh, well done. We thought you'd get all beaten up." This was Barney, wide-eyed and solemn. "You didn't get hurt, did you? What happened?" Jane ran her eyes critically over Simon like a doctor. "I'm all right." There was a sudden bright streak of light in the hall as the drawing-room door opened. Mother called over a murmur of voices from inside. "Is that you, children?" "Yes," Jane called across the banisters. "Supper's nearly ready. Don't be long. Come straight down when you've washed." "All right, Mother." The door closed again. "They're all talking like anything in there," Jane said to Simon. "Mother and Father met some long-lost friend in the harbour, and it turns out she lives in Penzance. I think she paints, too. She's staying to supper. She seems quite nice. Did he chase you for miles?" "Hundreds of miles," Simon said. He yawned. "Hundreds and hundreds. And then Great-Uncle Mary turned up just when I was going to get caught." "We sent him out after you," Barney said eagerly. They went up the stairs. "We didn't send him," said Jane reprovingly. "He went, like a rocket, as soon as he heard what had happened." "Well, he wouldn't have gone if we hadn't told him. Then Simon wouldn't have got rescued," Barney said, Barney was glowing with excitement. He would have given his ears to have been the hero of the chase. "We didn't know which way you'd gone. We tailed Miss Withers for a bit, but she just went down the headland to see and sat down on the grass at the bottom, looking out at the sea." His voice rose to an incredulous squeak. "So we rushed home, and Great-Uncle Mary was just back from fishing, so we were jolly glad to see you getting out of the car," he added unexpectedly. "Not half as glad as me." Simon yawned again and rubbed his forehead. "I do feel mucky. must have been when I hid in those bushes. Come on, I can tell you while I wash." First, they were too busy eating to talk, and then, toward the end of supper, too busy trying not to fall asleep. So all three children were grateful that Miss Hatherton was there. She was a small, bright, bouncy person, quite old, with cropped gray hair and twinkling eyes. She was a sculptress, a famous one. Great-Uncle Mary told them afterwards, and had taught Mother when she was a student in art school. She seemed to have a passion for catching sharks, and at the supper table she alternated between enthusiastic discussions of art with Mother and fishing with Father. The children listened with interest, but were relieved when Mrs. Polk brought the coffee in, and Mother, who had not missed their yawns, sent them to bed. "Nothing like Cornish air to send you to sleep," Miss Hatherton said cheerfully, as they pushed back their chairs and said good night. "If any of these follow in your footsteps," she added to Mother, "it'll be that one." She pointed disconcertedly at Barney. Barney blinked at her. "What do you want to be when you grow up, young man?" she asked him. "I'm going to be a fisherman," Barney said promptly, "with a big boat, like the White Heather." Miss Hatherton roared with laughter. "You tell me that in 10 years' time," she said, "and I shall be very surprised. Good night. I'll buy your first picture." "She's dotty," said Barney as he went upstairs. "I don't want to be a painter." "Never mind," Simon said. "She's nice. Don't go, Jane. Come in our room for a minute. I think Gummery's coming up." He made a sort of face at me as I closed the door. They waited and in a few moments Great-Uncle Mary appeared in the doorway. "I can't stay more than a moment," he said. "I am engaged in the beginnings of what promises to be a long and heated discussion with Miss Hatherton and your mother over the relative merits of Caravaggio and Salvator Rosa." "Coup," said Barney. "As you say, Barnabas, coup. I rather think I am out of my class with those two, however." "Gummery, we found it," Jane said eagerly. "We found the second step, and we've started properly now. It's one of the standing stones on Kamar Head. The boys did it between them, really," she added honestly. "Come on, Simon. Get the manuscript out." Simon got up and retrieved the telescope case, grubbier and more battered now than it had been, from the top of the wardrobe. They laid the scroll out on the bed and showed Great-Uncle Mary the rock where it had all begun, and the small rough sketch of the sun, and how they had worked their way to the standing stone. "But we can't tell which standing stone it is on the map," Simon said, "because they don't look the same here as they actually do on the headland." They all bent over the drawing that they still could not help calling a map. Great-Uncle Mary looked at it in silence. "Gummery," Jane said tentatively, an idea that she could not quite grasp beginning to chase about her brain. "Would he have done the whole thing on the same system, do you think?" "Whatever do you mean?" "Whatever do you mean?" Simon said, bouncing flat on his back on the bed. "Well, you remember when we were trying to work out the first bit, and I said it ought to be the way all treasure maps start, 6 paces to the east or something, and you said no, it might be done by getting one thing in line with another, as a sort of pointer." Well, does that mean that you have to get everything in line with something else at every step? Are all the clues going to be the same kind of clue?" "You mean, shall we have to get something else in line with the standing stone?" Great-Uncle Mary was still gazing down at the map. "It's possible. What makes you think so?" "That," Jane said. She pointed at the map. Everyone peered. "I can't see anything," Barney said querulously. "Look there, over the end of Kamar Head." "But that's just another of those blodges," Simon said in disgust. "How can it mean anything?" "Doesn't it remind you of anything else?" "No," Simon said. He lay back again and yawned. Great-Uncle Mary looked from one to the other and smiled to himself. "Oh, really?" Jane said, exasperated. "I know you've done jolly well today, and I know you're tired, but honestly—" "I'm listening," Barney said at her elbow. "What about the blodge?" "It's not a blodge at all," Jane said. "At least I don't think so. It's a bit smudged, but it's a circle, a properly drawn one, and I think it means something. It looks just like the other one, the one over the standing stones that turned out to be a setting sun." Simon propped himself up on his elbows and began to take interest again. Jane went on, thinking aloud. The way the first clue worked, we had to find the stone that was in line with the sun and the rock we started from, and then we had to go to the stone and check that it was the right one by the shadow. Well, perhaps now we have to do the same thing. Find something that's in line with the stone, and then go and see if its shadow points back to the stone, Great Uncle Mary said softly. The signs that wax and wane but do not die. Jane turned to him eagerly. That's it! That's what he said, isn't it, in the manuscript? There must be all sorts of clues in the writing, as well as in the drawing. Only they're even more buried, and we don't know how to get to them. This shadow business, Simon said doubtfully. Couldn't it be simpler than the way you just said? Perhaps all we have to do is find out what the shadow of our standing stones points at. But it points back to the place we started, Barney said, because he didn't use it as his first clue. His first clue was look and see what's between you and the setting sun. That shadow was just our way of proving it. Well, it doesn't have to be a shadow made by the setting sun this time. That's where my blodge comes in, Jane said. Barney said sleepily. Perhaps it's the rising sun, only it can't be. It isn't in the right place. No, Simon said. Of course it isn't. It's just a blodge. Jane spluttered with impatience and glared at him. Oh, why does it have to be the sun at all? Great Uncle Mary was still sitting silent and statuesque on the edge of the bed. He said again, lovingly to himself, the signs that wax and wane but do not die. Simon gazed at him blankly. Don't you see? Jane almost howled at him. It isn't the sun, it's the moon! Simon's face began to change, like the sky on a windy day, different expressions chasing one another across it. He looked from Jane to the map, to Great Uncle Mary. Gummery, he said accusingly, I believe you knew all the time. Is she right? Great Uncle Mary stood up. The bed creaked as he rose, and his height seemed to fill the room. The light, swinging from the ceiling behind his head, cast his face into shadow, and brought back once more to all three of them the old sense of mystery. His great dark figure, with a mist of light faintly silvery round his head, left them silent and awed. This is your quest, he said. You must find the way every time yourselves. I am the guardian, no more. I can take no part and give you no help beyond guarding you all the way. He turned slightly so that the light shone on his face, and his voice was ordinary again. I imagine you'll need some guarding on the next stage, too. You know what it is now, don't you? Simon said slowly, We have to find which way the shadow of the standing stones points at night, under the moon. Barney said matter-of-factly, The full moon. The full moon? Jane's blodge. He drew it round, not crescent-shaped, so it must mean the full moon. What's it like now? You are not going to the headland to look at the moon tonight, Great Uncle Mary said firmly. No, I didn't really mean that. I don't think I could manage it anyway. Simon stifled another yawn. I wonder whether the moon was full or not now. We should have to wait for ages if it were all thin and new. It's full tonight, Jane said. I could see it shining through my bedroom window, so that means it will be almost as bright tomorrow. Would that do, Gummery? I mean, could we go and look tomorrow night? Before their great-uncle could answer, Simon was sitting up again, looking thoughtful. There's one thing wrong with all this. If we've got a moon that's only just past full, then we've got all the light we ought to have. But the moon changes, doesn't it? I mean, it rises and sets at different times and in different places, according to the time of year. Well, we're in August now, but how do we know that the Cornishman wasn't working out his clues in the middle of January, or April or something, when the moon wouldn't look the same as it does to us? And we will pause there.